Shaw lost her job. She thought it was because of a hostile takeover. She was wrong. She had no idea she'd just become collateral damage in a war that had never really been about business. Because someone made one mistake. They forgot who was standing beside her. By the time they realized, it was already too late. A week later, his name surfaced again. A colleague mentioned a Dallas acquisition making waves through San Francisco's business circles. Nathan Chapson. Private equity. Texas money. California ambitions. The kind of profile that generated breathless business journalism from people who found wealth inherently fascinating. Margot read the article over morning coffee and thought, that's the man from the gala. The one whose eyes had found Ga-min across the room with an expression that had been neither afraid nor respectful, but something else. She brought it to Ga-min over breakfast. He glanced at the article, set her phone back on the table without comment. You called him an inconvenience, she said. Yes. That's all you're giving me? He picked up his coffee. He mistakes influence for ownership. She looked at him. He looked back with the patience of a man who has said exactly as much as he intends to say and is comfortable in the silence that follows. She had learned, over the last year, that pressing him for more produced nothing except the quiet of a locked door. The information would arrive when he decided it was time. She let it go. Philadelphia in October was exactly as she'd remembered it. The crisp autumn air, trees beginning to turn, and the familiar scent of home greeting her the moment they stepped off the jet at PHL. Something in her chest loosened that she hadn't noticed was tight. You're doing the thing, Ga-min said. What thing? The breathing thing. You breathe differently here. She looked at him over her shoulder. He was watching her with the expression that meant he'd been cataloging something about her, and had finally decided to mention it. In the clean October air, in the city she was from, he was, as always impossibly, unfairly, the most striking thing in her field of vision. The jaw, the height, the quiet authority of him that the Philadelphia wind was entirely failing to diminish. He dressed for the cold. A dark coat. Something underneath it that fit his shoulders with the precision she'd given up trying not to notice. He looked exactly the way he always did, calm, composed, and quietly impossible to ignore. I like it here, she said. I know. He took a bag without being asked. Let's go. Her grandmother's house was at maximum capacity. Cousins she only saw at occasions like this, aunts who communicated primarily through food, children weaving between knees, the joyful chaos of a family that liked each other. Somehow, for generations had managed to fit into one house without anyone quite knowing how. Every chair in the house had been claimed. The late arrivals were balancing paper plates against kitchen counters, or standing in the hallway talking over one another. Nana Shaw turned 90 with the grace of a woman who had outlasted every prediction made about her, and found the whole situation mildly amusing. She held Margot's face in both hands and said, You look different, with the precision of someone who has been paying attention to her granddaughter for 31 years. Good different or bad different? Happy different. She looked past Margot's shoulder at Ga-min, who was standing in the hallway being assessed by 3 aunts simultaneously with the composed patience of a man accustomed to high-stakes situations. He's very tall. Yes. Bring him here. Margot laughed and waved him over. Ga-min crossed the room without hesitation. He sat with Nana Shaw for 20 minutes, and whatever passed between them, she couldn't hear the whole of it over the noise of the house. Ended with her grandmother holding his hand and saying something that made him smile, the private smile. The one Margot had spent years thinking was only for her. Good, Margot thought. Then she went to find her mother. They were staying at the hotel 2 blocks from her parents' house. Her mother's insistence, which Margot understood was her mother's way of offering them privacy without surrendering proximity. The house was exactly as she remembered. Too many coats on the hallway hooks. Too many memories tucked into corners. Ga-min moved through it with the same quiet ease he always had. Her family had stopped treating him like a guest years ago. He was simply Ga-min. Her father appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding 2 empty glasses. Ga-min. Ga-min looked up immediately. Give me a hand in the workshop. Of course. Margot didn't even glance over from helping her mother plate dessert. Don't let him rope you into fixing something. Her father laughed. No promises. The workshop door closed behind them. For a moment neither spoke. Sawdust. Old wood. The hum of a space built by hand. Mr. Shaw set the glasses on the workbench. I owe you an apology. Ga-min's expression didn't shift. I don't think you do. Mr. Shaw exhaled, bracing his hands on the bench. Months ago, my company started restructuring. They were trying to retire me before my pension qualified. A humorless smile. 40 years, and suddenly I was a number on a spreadsheet. Ga-min listened the way he always did. Fully, quietly. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't even tell Margot. I thought we were going to lose more than my job. He paused. Then everything changed. My manager called me in. Said he didn't know who I knew, but someone important made sure the decision disappeared. Silence settled. It was you. Ga-min didn't answer right away. I asked someone to look into it. Mr. Shaw let out a soft laugh. I knew it. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. Another quiet beat. Margot never told me, Mr. Shaw said. So how did you know? Ga-min's answer was simple. I found out. Mr. Shaw studied him. Why? Ga-min looked at the workbench, at the shelves they'd built together years ago. Because she would have worried. Something shifted in Mr. Shaw's expression, not gratitude. Respect. You know, he said, when Margot first brought you home, I thought you were just another friend. A small smile. You hardly said 2 words. I still don't. Mr. Shaw laughed. No, you don't. He folded his arms. You know what I never understood? Ga-min looked at him. How the two of you convinced yourselves you were just friends. A small smile touched Ga-min's mouth. By the end of senior year, Mr. Shaw continued, you were here every other weekend. My wife never let you leave hungry. You knew where everything was in this room. Ga-min looked around. The old workbench. The faded Phillies pennant. The shelves they'd built one Saturday afternoon. After a long moment, he spoke. Mr. Shaw. A beat. I'd like your permission to marry your daughter. Mr. Shaw stared at him for one stunned second. Then burst into laughter. Real, full laughter that echoed off the walls. Oh son, he wiped at one eye. You just cost me $200. Ga-min blinked. Margot's mother made a bet years ago, Mr. Shaw said. She said you two would end up married. I told her you'd waste years convincing yourselves you were just friends. He shook his head, still smiling. She never doubted it. Even back in college. He stepped forward. Son, you've had my permission for a long time. I was just waiting for you to ask. He offered his hand. Ga-min took it. Mr. Shaw held on a moment longer before pulling him into a brief, firm embrace. Take care of her. I always will. I know. Back in the kitchen, Margot looked up as they returned. What took so long? Her father grinned. Oh, we were just solving the world's problems. Margot rolled her eyes. I should have known. Ga-min met her gaze. Calm. Steady. Exactly as he'd left. She smiled at him. He smiled back. Neither of them said a word. They left her parents' house just before midnight. Philadelphia had quietened without ever really becoming quiet. A passing car. Someone laughing half a block away. The distant hiss of tires on wet pavement from streets that had seen rain earlier that evening. The hotel was only a short walk. Margot slipped one hand into the pocket of Ga-min's coat instead of taking it. He glanced down. Cold. No. Then why? She shrugged. Because I can. A small smile touched his mouth. You've become very possessive. She laughed. I'm dating a billionaire. So? I've decided to take full advantage. I see. I've been told there are benefits. There are. She smiled to herself. I thought so. They walked on. For a while there was only the sound of their footsteps keeping time with one another. After everything California had become, boardrooms, dinners, airports, security, names that opened doors without permission. The simplicity of walking beside him through the streets she'd grown up in felt almost unfamiliar. I missed this, she said quietly. What? Walking. He looked at her. She smiled. Sometimes our lives become a lot. They do. I like this better. He took her hand from his pocket and threaded his fingers through hers instead. So do I. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. The hotel came into view a few minutes later, its entrance glowing softly against the Philadelphia night. The hotel room was quiet. He'd arranged something. She didn't know when he'd had time, but the room was lit differently, something on the table she couldn't quite see from the doorway. She came in. She closed the door behind her. He turned from the window, and the city lights of Philadelphia were behind him, and he was just him. Hers. Looking at her like he always looked at her, like she was the only still point in any room. He crossed to her and took her hand. He looked at her for a long moment. Your father said yes. She frowned. My father? A small smile. I thought I should ask him first. Before she could say anything, he lowered himself onto one knee. The ring was exquisite. She would spend years trying to describe it and never quite manage. Not because of its size, though it caught every light in the room, but because somehow he'd chosen something that looked as though it had always belonged on her hand. Elegant. Timeless. Entirely her. He didn't make a speech. He wasn't a speech person. He said, I've wanted to ask you this for a long time. A faint smile. Lake Como only convinced me to stop pretending I should wait. Another pause, brief. Margot Shaw, will you marry me? The words were quiet. Certain. He wasn't asking because he doubted the answer. He was asking because some promises deserved to be spoken aloud. She laughed once through the tears she hadn't realized were there. Yes. Her voice broke. Of course I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger. His hands were warm and steady. He brought her hand up and pressed his mouth to her knuckle, just above the ring, and held it there for a long moment, and she thought, 7 years. We spent 7 years getting here, and it was exactly the right amount of time, and I would do all of it again. She curled her fingers into his collar and pulled him down and kissed him the way she kissed him when they were alone, and there was no performance required. Completely. Without reservation. With everything she had. And he made the sound he made when she caught him off guard, low and quiet, and pulled her closer. Outside, Philadelphia carried on exactly as it always had. Inside, everything had changed. On the flight home, she kept looking at her hand. It's not going to disappear, he said, without looking up from whatever he was reading. She felt her face go warm. I know that. You've looked at it 11 times in the last hour. I haven't counted. He looked up. The private smile. I have. She laughed and tucked her hand under her knee with deliberate theatricality. He returned to his reading. She lasted approximately 4 minutes before she looked again. He didn't comment. She could feel him not commenting. She was beginning to understand, one of his primary love languages. San Francisco noticed Nathan Chapson the way business communities notice new money. First with curiosity, then with calculation. 1 acquisition became 3 within a month of the gala. 3 became 6. The business press loved the story. The photograph showed a man who understood cameras, composed, confident, the expression of someone who knew a story was being written about him and approved of every chapter. Margot read the articles because she was a project manager and commercial property sat adjacent to several of her company's clients. She liked understanding the industries around her. She read them the way she read all business news. With interest and without sentiment. The acquisitions were aggressive. The timelines were relentless. Several of the companies that changed hands had employees describing a culture that changed before the paint was dry on the new letterhead. Senior executives resigned almost overnight. Long-serving CEOs quietly disappeared after closed-door board meetings. Some walked away with generous settlements. Others left with nothing but carefully worded press releases thanking them for their years of service. The articles called it decisive leadership. The people inside those companies called it something else. One report briefly mentioned the Clark family, whose investment group had quietly financed several of Chapson's largest acquisitions. Their name appeared only in passing before the story returned to Nathan himself. Margot barely noticed it. She didn't mention it to Ga-min, who she assumed was aware, because Ga-min was always aware of things before she was. What she hadn't noticed, what she was still too close to see, was that glow was in every photograph. Not prominently, not front and center, but there. At Nathan's elbow, or at the edge of the frame, or visible in the background of the venue photos that accompanied the announcement pieces. Glow, who had left G1 and attached herself to a faster orbit. Glow, who had always been moving toward something bigger and had finally, apparently, found it. Margot noticed the photographs eventually. She thought, I hope she's happy. She meant it. The hope was uncomplicated by the caution that preceded it, which was either growth or distance. She wasn't entirely sure which. The lunch at her favorite restaurant, a Philly-style sandwich place in the Mission that had no business being this good at roast pork, happened on a Tuesday. She was with 2 colleagues. The table was good, the food was ordered, and the conversation had reached the comfortable middle territory of a working lunch between people who actually liked each other. She was mid-sentence about a contractor timeline when she felt the quality of the room shift. Glow was already there. Across the restaurant, in a corner table, surrounded by people Margot didn't recognize. Bright, loud, the energy of people who are performing a good time as much as having one. Glow caught her eye. Something crossed her face. It had been months since the Hayes Valley lunch. Since the polite, painful conversation that had ended with Glow walking out and the understanding between them hardening into something that was neither friendship nor enmity, but a clean, acknowledged distance. Margot had felt grief about it, in the way you grieve things that were real even when they were also wrong for you. She had let herself feel it and moved through it and arrived somewhere on the other side that was clear if not comfortable. She nodded, courteous, then turned back to her colleagues. The table across the room existed somewhere at the edge of her attention, until one of her colleagues stopped mid-sentence. The manager was at their table. He looked the way the restaurant owner in Old City had looked when Ga-min was in his dining room. The expression of a man caught between 2 imperatives and desperately wishing to be somewhere else. "I'm so sorry," he said. "There's been a situation with the reservation system. I'm afraid this table has been reassigned." Margot looked at him, then across the restaurant. Glow wasn't looking at her. She was looking at her phone, with the studied neutrality of someone who has arranged something and is distancing herself from the arrangement. "The reservation is under my name," Margot said calmly. "We're already seated. I understand. I'm so sorry." He was sweating. "The restaurant group changed ownership yesterday. There are new protocols. I'm genuinely Nathan Chapson's group," she said. He looked at the table. "Yes." She looked at her colleagues. She looked at the food they hadn't touched yet. She thought, for one brief moment, about her phone and the call she could make. The name she could say, the way the room would rearrange itself around that name like water finding a new channel. She'd felt that temptation before. She knew its shape. She put a napkin on the table. "We'll go," she said. "Thank you." She left a cash tip for the server on the way out, because the server had done nothing wrong, and the server had a shift to finish, and the server was a person, and walked out into the San Francisco afternoon with her colleagues and suggested the Thai place 2 blocks over that didn't require reservations and had better dessert anyway. She did not call Ga-min. She did not make a scene. She simply chose dignity and went to find better food. She had been working on the airport-adjacent project for 3 weeks when the company meeting was called. It was the kind of meeting that carried its own weight before anyone said anything. The way people walked in, the arrangement of faces at the front of the room, the silence that preceded a kind of announcement. She sat in the 3rd row and felt it and knew, before the CEO opened his mouth, that something had changed that could not be unchanged. Nathan Chapson's investment group had acquired the company. Effective immediately. Restructuring would begin within the week. Certain roles were under review. Her name was on the review list. The one-to-one was in a glass-walled conference room that had always made her feel exposed, which she now understood was not accidental. Nathan Chapson looked exactly as she remembered him from the gala. Composed, deliberate, with the smooth assurance of a man who had decided long ago that rooms were for winning and had structured his life around that premise. He studied her across the table with what felt like genuine curiosity. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "I didn't expect this." "Expect what?" "You." A gesture that encompassed something she didn't fully follow. Someone with Gong Ga-min's resources behind her, sitting in a mid-level project management role. Working a 9 to 5. He tilted his head. He must not have offered. "He offered," she said. "I chose this." Something shifted in his expression. Reassessment. She watched it happen. "He lets you make that choice." "He's not the one making my choices." He looked at her for a long moment. She held it. She'd had practice, in the last year, at sitting across from powerful men who expected her to wilt under their attention. She'd learned that what they were actually looking for was the first sign of softness, the place where they could find traction, and that the most effective response was simply to not provide it. Not with coldness, just with steadiness. "You're more interesting than I expected," Nathan said. There was no admiration in it. Only the quiet acknowledgement that he'd misjudged something. He terminated her employment. The letter was professional, the severance generous, the reasoning wrapped in the bloodless language of restructuring. She listened to it all with the composed attention of someone receiving information they need and intend to act on. Is that everything? She said. He looked at her. You're not going to… What? A pause. React. I'm reacting internally, she said. Anything else? She walked out with her chin level, and she did not look for Ga-min's number on the way to her desk. She didn't use the one name that could have rearranged the room before she'd finished saying it. It hurt more than she'd expected. But beneath the hurt was something steadier, the clean satisfaction of knowing that what was happening to her was happening to her, not to his fiancé, not to a borrowed name, but to Margot Shaw, who was packing her desk and keeping her spine straight and would grieve this properly later in the right order. Glow found her at the desk. She came in with the energy of someone who's been waiting to make an entrance, a flush of triumph that she was barely trying to contain. She stood in the doorway and looked at Margot packing her things, and her expression was incandescent in a way that had nothing of the warm, chaotic brightness that Margot had once found irresistible. This was something colder, something that had curdled. I know this wasn't easy, Glow said, and the sympathy was decorative. Margot kept packing. Glow. I didn't plan for it to go this way. But he wanted to help me, and this was the way he found. A beat. Sometimes the things that hurt are the ones that are necessary. Margot looked at her. At the woman who had shown her San Francisco. Who had been warm and luminous and genuinely in her way, trying to give Margot something she'd wanted for herself. She thought about Hayes Valley. About the things Glow had said in anger, and the things she'd said underneath the anger that were simply true. Glow, she said. I know you're hurting. I know, G1. Don't. I know this is about more than me. And I'm not angry at you. She meant it. She could feel that she meant it. But I need you to hear me. What you're doing, what Nathan is doing, this isn't about us. You're not in the middle of something personal. You're in the middle of something much larger, and you don't know all of it. Glow's expression sharpened. California doesn't belong to Ga-min, Margot. There are people here who don't care who he is. Nathan has the Clark family. He has connections that your fiancé has never even. I hear you, Margot said. She closed her box. She picked it up. I hope it goes well. She walked out. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She was 3 blocks from the building, standing at a crosswalk in the San Francisco afternoon, box in her arms, when she finally let herself feel it. The loss of the job she built carefully and honestly. The grief of competence being made irrelevant by power she hadn't asked for and power she'd refused to use. She let it sit for the 3 minutes it took for the light to change. Then she walked to her car and drove home. He was at the kitchen counter when she came in. He looked up from whatever he was reading. He looked at the box. He didn't say anything. He came around the counter and took the box from her arms and set it on the table, and then just stood close, not touching, just present. He acquired the company, she said. I know. He terminated me in the restructure. I know. She looked at him. How long have you known? About the acquisition, 2 days. About the termination, he checked something in himself. An hour ago. She exhaled. You didn't warn me. It wasn't my decision to make. He met her eyes, and in his she saw something she didn't often see there, the quiet strain of someone who's been exercising enormous restraint and is nearing the limit of it. You've told me more than once not to manage what you know. She heard her own words return to her. She thought about Philadelphia. About Lake Como. About 7 years of a man who was constitutionally incapable of not arranging things around her safety. Learning, slowly, at cost, that her autonomy was something he had to protect from himself as much as from anyone else. Thank you, she said. A minute later, he placed a mug of tea in front of her. Exactly the way she liked it. She smiled despite herself. You always know. I pay attention. She looked down into the steam. I really liked that job. I know. Silence settled comfortably between them. Not awkward. Not empty. Just shared. She climbed onto the kitchen counter, because standing suddenly felt like unnecessary work. Ga-min stepped between her knees without thinking about it, as though they'd done this 100 times before. He put one hand gently against the back of her neck, warm and steady. She leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest. His hands settled lightly at her waist. No urgency. No attempt to fix anything. Just there. I'm sorry, she whispered. His thumb traced the side of her sweater. Don't. I wanted to leave on my own. I know. I wanted one more year. I know. She laughed once. A small, tired sound. Were you tempted? He looked at her. To stop it? She nodded. Very. She searched his face. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because the company was already gone. She looked at him. You knew. I suspected. And you still let me walk into that meeting. I let you walk out of it. She frowned slightly. I don't understand. His forehead rested against hers again. I couldn't save the company. No. I could have saved your job. She nodded. I know. But then it wouldn't have been yours anymore. Silence. I didn't want your last day there to belong to me. She closed her eyes. The words settled somewhere deep inside her. For the first time all day, she stopped trying to hold herself together and simply let herself be held. You never have to work again, he said. If you don't want to. If you want to. I want to work. Then a role in any company I have. Or your own firm. Whatever shape you want it to take, I will build it with you. He paused. Everything I have is already yours, Margot. It's been yours for a long time. I was content to wait until you believed that. She pressed her face into his chest and thought about all the things she'd spent a year negotiating. What to accept, what to resist, what was love and what was management, and felt with the clarity of something long overdue, that she knew the difference now. She could hold both at once. She could receive what he offered from a position of herself. I want to start my own division, she said, against his shirt. PMO. Specialist. Mine. Yes, he said. No hesitation. No conditions. She kissed him. The private dining room was on the 14th floor of a financial district hotel that Nathan had been using as his base of operations since Dallas. A choice that suggested he understood San Francisco as a place to extract from rather than inhabit, which was its own kind of information. He arrived expecting a meeting with a senior partner of a Singapore investment firm. The kind of meeting that required a room like this, with its polished table and crystal glassware and the discreet, well-trained staff that spoke only when spoken to. He sat. He checked his watch. He reached for his phone. The door opened. He looked up. Gong Ga-min walked in carrying nothing except the quiet confidence Nathan had first noticed at the gala. There was no performance in him. No attempt to impress. He simply looked like a man who already knew exactly why he was there. Nathan stood. The waiter placed a hand on his shoulder. Not violent. Not dramatic. Simply firm and final, with the practiced efficiency of someone who does this as a professional matter. Nathan went still. He looked toward the door, toward the security detail he'd brought from Dallas, the two men who should have been visible in the hallway. His two security men were still there. They simply weren't looking at him. One was engaged in quiet conversation with another member of staff. Neither moved. Neither intervened. He sat. Ga-min crossed to the table. He looked at the bottle of scotch that had been opened and waiting for the Singapore partner. He poured himself a glass with the ease of a man helping himself to something already his. He held it to the light for a moment. Took a sip. Nodded once. Macallan. Another sip. Good taste. Nathan said nothing. Ga-min sat across from him. The waiter stepped out. The room closed around them, quiet and warm and not particularly safe feeling, despite its excellent furnishings. I have no issue with hostile acquisitions, Ga-min said. His voice was the pleasant, conversational register he used in business settings. Unhurried, without inflection. Business is business. The market is the market. He set down the glass. Margot isn't. Silence. The moment you involved her, it stopped being business. He looked at Nathan directly. Nathan held the stare. He was braver than most people in this situation. Or more miscalculating. The distance between those two things was narrower than most people understood until they were sitting in a room like this. The airport project is mine, Nathan said. The contract is locked. The investors are the Clark family, Ga-min said. Yes. He reached for the glass again. Let me tell you about the airport project. He said it conversationally, the way you share news with an acquaintance. Without pleasure and without cruelty. Just information being transferred at the correct time. The project company had concealed substantial debt before the acquisition. Nathan had purchased, in the precision of due diligence that his team apparently failed to conduct with appropriate rigor, not a thriving enterprise but the appearance of one. The airport construction contract itself contained a 30-day termination clause triggered by material change of ownership, a clause the airport authority had exercised 6 days ago. The contract had been reassigned. To whom? Nathan said. His voice had changed. Something in it had gone very still. Ga-min looked at him pleasantly. Elsewhere. You don't have the authority to. The airport authority exercised its own clause, Ga-min said. I simply ensure they had all the relevant information when they were deciding whether to do so. He paused. You purchased a company's debts and a contract that no longer exists. The investors who funded that acquisition are currently, he glanced at his watch, becoming aware of this. Nathan's face did something it probably rarely did. Went genuinely, visibly blank. The mask slipped. For the first time since they'd sat down, Nathan looked like a man who hadn't anticipated the next move. The Clarks will come for you, yes, Ga-min said. I imagine so. He was not smiling. He was simply stating facts, without malice or satisfaction, as though the outcome had already been decided. You came to San Francisco and treated it as something available. You made that assumption based on the absence of visible resistance. A pause. I don't advertise my work, Mr. Chapson. Absence of performance is not absence of capability. Nathan's jaw tightened. I'll sue. Every piece of this. You can, Ga-min said. He stood. He buttoned his jacket with the patient, precise movements of a man completing a meeting. Just be certain you have the stomach for what discovery would reveal. He nodded at Nathan. Not dismissively. Just finally, in the manner of a completed transaction. The scotch is quite good, he said. I'd finished the glass. He walked out. The door closed behind him with no more sound than any door closing anywhere. Nathan sat alone in the private dining room with an open bottle of Macallan, at the terrible silence of a man who has just understood the full scope of what he didn't know. Glo was in Nathan's hotel suite when he returned. Surrounded by luggage, she'd begun packing with the bright, purposeful energy of someone who has decided to enjoy the next chapter, and is ready to begin. She was talking about Cape Town. She had been talking about Cape Town for 3 days. The villa, the itinerary, the light in autumn. She looked up when he came in. Something in his face made her stop. What happened? She said. He crossed to the wardrobe, pulled out his own suitcase. Began, efficiently, and without ceremony, to pack. Nathan. I'm returning to Dallas. She looked at the suitcase. I'll need an hour. The Cape Town booking. You should cancel it. She stared at him. What? I was using you, Glo. Excuse me? He shrugged. You gave me access to people I needed to know. I gave you access to the life you wanted. We both got something out of it. She stood very still. We weren't in a relationship, he said. We were a mutually beneficial arrangement that has run its course. She said, Get out. It's my suite. She said it again. He zipped the suitcase. He picked it up. He looked at her with the detached focus of a man already thinking about what came next. Somehow, that was worse than anger would have been. Then he walked out. She stood in the room he'd left her in, and felt the catastrophic weight of having confused being chosen for being valued. She'd spent years watching other women be kept and dismissed, and had decided she would never be that. And had become it anyway, because she had been so focused on the power of the arrangement that she hadn't noticed the arrangement had no floor. She was not a bad person. She was not even a cruel one, beneath the surface of what California had encouraged her to become. She was a woman who had been so afraid of being powerless that she had made herself into something she didn't quite recognize, and now she was standing in a hotel suite in San Francisco with a Cape Town booking in her phone, and no one to use it with, and it was very quiet. Outside the hotel, Nathan carried one suitcase to the waiting car. His driver opened the rear door. He was reaching for it when a black SUV pulled silently to the curb. The rear window lowered. The man inside was older, 70s. He was dressed immaculately. His expression was the composed neutrality of someone who has made decisions that other people have to live inside. Nathan. Nathan recognized him immediately. The Clark family patriarch. Nathan looked at his driver. His driver was looking at the middle distance with the focused attention of a man who does not intend to be part of whatever comes next. The SUV door opened. No one gestured. No one needed to. Nathan understood the grammar of the moment. He climbed in. The door closed. The Clark convoy disappeared into San Francisco traffic, taking Nathan Chapson with it. Whatever came next belonged to the Clark family. Several months later, the PMO division had no name yet. She was working on that, sitting at her desk in one of Ga-min's offices on a Wednesday afternoon, surrounded by project documentation and the comfortable, productive chaos of something being built from the ground up, thinking about what to call the thing she was making. She had 3 candidates on a post-it. She had opinions about all 3. She had not yet consulted anyone. That was the thing about the division. It was hers. The idea, the structure, the team she was slowly and carefully assembling. People who had been referred to her by colleagues, interviewed by her, selected on the basis of her own judgment. Ga-min's company name was behind it, which provided certain resources and a certain weight in the market, and she had reached the place where she could hold that fact without it diminishing what she was building. The name was a foundation, not a ceiling. She was the architect. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. That hadn't changed. What had changed was the completeness with which she knew it. The wedding planning had colonized their private living room. There were fabric swatches on the coffee table, organized by ceremony. 1 pile for Seoul, 1 pile for Philadelphia, a 3rd pile she hadn't categorized yet that represented possibilities she wasn't ready to commit to or discard. There was a pinboard on the wall that Ga-min had installed without comment 6 weeks ago. Simply appeared one evening, properly anchored, at the exact height that was comfortable for her to reach. There were seating charts in various states of completion, a running document on her laptop titled, People We Have to Invite versus People We Want to Invite, and a growing folder of florist photographs organized by city. 2 ceremonies. The traditional Korean one in Seoul, the hanbok colors she'd been researching for months, the elegance of ritual that felt ancient and alive, the honor of being received into his family's customs with care and intention. And the wedding in Philadelphia. Her church, her grandmother in the front row, her father trying to hold it together, and her mother not trying at all. Her people. His people. 2 rooms full of everyone they'd come from, bearing witness to where they'd arrived. She was looking at a seating chart when she heard the door. She knew the sound of him coming home, the way she knew everything about him now. The rhythm of it, the quiet that preceded him, the way the house seemed to slightly exhale when he was in it. He moved through the hallway and into the living room and looked at the pinboard, the swatches, the organized chaos of 2 ceremonies being built simultaneously on a coffee table, and then at her. You added more swatches, he said. Only 3. He looked at the pinboard. There are at least 12 new things on that board. They're comparison swatches. What does that mean? It means you look at them comparatively. They don't count individually. He sat beside her on the couch, close, unhurried, the warm, settled weight of him that she had spent 7 years wanting from a careful distance, and now simply had, every evening, as a fact of her life. He looked at the pinboard. He looked at the seating chart in her lap. He looked at her laptop, open to a photograph of the Seoul venue she'd been circling for weeks, its arching wood and clean winter light, the space that would hold both of them in front of the people who mattered most. That one, he said. She'd learned, by now, to recognize when he'd made a decision. She looked at the photograph, at the space that was his and that she was choosing because it was his, because choosing it was love made practical. Yeah, she said. That one. He took the laptop from her and set it on the table. She let him. He pulled her into his side with the ease of 2 people who have finally stopped negotiating the distance between them, and she tucked her feet under her and rested her head against his shoulder and looked at the room. At the seating charts and the swatches and the pinboard covered in photographs of places they would stand and say things to each other in front of everyone they loved. It was real. Not the way Lake Como had been real. Beautiful and suspended, a week outside of ordinary life. Not the way their Philadelphia months had been real. Warm and intimate, but edged with things she hadn't seen yet. This was the other kind of real. The daily, unglamorous, load-bearing kind. The breakfast kind. The cold coffee at the desk kind. The coming home kind. The forever kind. She looked at her ring. She wasn't conscious of doing it. It simply happened, the way it had been happening since Philadelphia, the involuntary gravity of something she still couldn't quite believe she got to keep. It's still there, he said. I know. You've checked 3 times since you sat down. I haven't counted. I have, he said. She laughed. The full, unguarded kind. The kind she'd been laughing with him since they were 22 and nobody, and everything was still ahead of them. He pressed his mouth to the top of her head and stayed there, and she thought about all of it. The 7 years, the cobblestone street in Lake Como, the elevator code in Philadelphia, the blue rose at her door, the box she'd carried out of a building with her spine straight and her heart breaking, and felt it all settle into something she didn't need to carry anymore. It had brought her here. That was enough. Margot once came to California, hoping to discover who Gong Ga-min really was. Instead, she discovered who she wanted to become. Outside, the light through the window was going golden long, the good California late afternoon light that she had come to love without planning to. Ga-min was warm beside her. Her ring caught the light. The seating charts waited. They had time.